The Italians offered Mohammed-Abdullah Hassan a home, and this is in a treaty that was signed on the 5th March 1905 at Illig, and it was, of course, a treaty between the Italians and Mohammed-Abdullah Hassan. Now, if you don't know who Mohammed-Abdullah Hassan was, Mohammed-Abdullah Hassan was a Somali, we could say, freedom fighter. He is a guy who, the moment the British came to British Somaliland, he was not happy about it, and he saw through what they wanted to do, and he decided he was going to fight them, and actually started we could say a war against the British beginning 1898 to 1899, around there, and that war went on up to 1920s. It was a war that was fought for a very long time, and actually it's a war that is known to be the first ever war in Africa where aeroplanes were used. There's a very interesting historical fact. Now, Mohammed-Abdullah Hassan, who had, of course, a lot of issues with the British. This is 1905. He has been fighting with the British for maybe 5, 6, 7 years. And the Italians decide to intervene. And they decide to try to have a peace treaty signed between them and the Mohammed-Abdullah Hassan, but also with the British and Ethiopians in the mix. In this video, we are going to read at least part of that treaty and see what it entails and what was agreed upon. And this is a treaty that there is also another document. Now, this treaty appears in the book that I'm reading at the moment. The treaties on the lands of the Somali, these are treaties that were signed between 1840 and 1950s. And it has close to 44 different treaties that affected the lands of the Somalis. Now, of course, this is a treaty that is unique in this list or in this book because this is the treaty. There are like 2 items in this book that touch on Mohammed-Abdullah Hassan, and this is one of them. Now, this treaty was signed, as I said, on 5th March 1905 at Illig, parties Italy and Sheikh Mohammed-Abdullah. Now, it was drafted in Arabic. Now, this is a translation to English, and I guess it was translated to Italian and then to English because the British were also a party, sort of. Now, this is how it reads. Praise to the most merciful God, in accordance with the common desire of the contracting parties to afford peace and tranquility to all Somalis, Cavaliere PESTALOZZA, the special envoy acting under the authority of the Italian government, and Said Mohammed-ben-Abdullah, acting for himself and for the chiefs and notables of the tribes following him, have agreed on the complete acceptance of the following clauses and conditions. Now, PESTALOZZA is an individual I've come across. It's a name I've come across when I was reading another book, Douglas Jardine's The Mad Mullah of Somaliland. Article 1. There shall be peace and lasting accord between the above-mentioned Said Mohammed with all the dervishes dependent on him and the government of Italy and all its dependents among the Somali Majarten and others. The Majarten were treated as another party in this treaty. In view of this, and in relation thereto, there shall also be peace and accord between Said Mohammed with the above-mentioned dervishes and the British government, with all its dependents among the Somalis and others. Likewise, shall there be peace between Said with his above-mentioned dervishes and the government of Abyssinia, with all its dependents. The Italian government guarantees and pledges themselves on behalf of their dependents, also on behalf of the British government. Now, this is a very interesting paragraph because in another item where the communication between the British and the Italians are captured, as the Italians are informing the British about the details of this treaty, it is mentioned that the Italians tell the British, we are not going to guarantee what happens with the Ethiopians. Like, we will leave Mohammed-Abdullah Hassan and the Ethiopians to deal with their own part of the agreement. We can only guarantee of what the Italians are going to do, and you, the British, are going to guarantee what you are going to do. It's a very interesting communication, actually. But here, the Italians are basically telling Mohammed-Abdullah Hassan, or agreeing with him, that they are doing it on behalf of the British, or signing the treaty on behalf of the British, and also on behalf of the Ethiopians, also others like the Majarten and other parties. It continues, every disagreement or difference between Said and his people and the dependents of the Italian government, or those whom the government have pledged themselves, as for the example the English and their dependents, shall be settled in a peaceful and friendly manner by means of ERCO, or of envoys from the parties under the presidency of Italian delegates or delegate, and also in the presence of English envoy whenever British interests are concerned. Now, Eric, of course, is this traditional Somali way of sorting out differences by bringing in elders and having those negotiations. Now, number two, Said Mohammed-Abdullah is authorized by the Italian to establish for himself and his people a fixed residence at the point most convenient for communication with the sea between Ras Garad and Ras Gabi. Now, when you read Douglas Jardine's book, The Mad Mullah of Somaliland, this comes up actually, and there is a letter that is shared in that book where Mohammed-Abdullah Hassan complains about his animals being captured and his people being harassed as they go to the coast to do trading, because there was this agreement. He was supposed to be given a freeway that he can go to the coast, do business, import stuff, but the British were kind of like not allowing him to do that. And that is in the other book. But here we are looking at the treaty itself, where it seems to say that he would be allowed to communicate, to transport, to go to the sea and bring stuff and back. It continues. This also with the approval of Yusuf and Sultan Osman Mahmud. Now, these are the leaders of the other commonwealths. The residence and all its inhabitants shall be under the protection of the Italian government under their flag. If and when the Italian government so desires, they shall be at liberty to install in that residence a representative of Italian nationality or other person as governor with soldiers and custom house or tithes. Said Mohammed shall in every way afford help, support to the government in all matters, and until the government appoints a special representative of their own, the said Said Mohammed shall be their procurator. The government of the tribe subject to him in the interior shall remain in the hands of Said Mohammed and shall be exercised with justice and equality. So the Italians were recognizing that Mohammed-Abdullah Hassan had his own people who followed him, his followers, and they needed to be recognized as his followers so that nobody interferes with their lives. Moreover, he shall provide for the security of the roads and safety of the caravans. So on his side, he was supposed to provide security on the caravans that went through the land. Number three, in the above mentioned residence, commerce shall be free for all subject to the regulation and ordinances of the government. So in the residence that he was going to be allowed to establish, there was going to be, of course, freedom to do trading. However, from henceforth, the importation and disembarkation of firearms, cartridges, lead, and powder necessary for the same is prohibited. So the only thing they told him he could not transact through that residence is, of course, weaponry, and for a reason that is very clear, of course. Said Mohammed himself and his people pledged themselves by formal and complete pledge, as also by oath before God, to prevent the traffic, importation, and embarkation of slaves and firearms, and whensoever they may come, whether by sea or land. So Mohammed-Abdullah Hassan was going to offer to stop any kind of slave trading. Whoever shall infringe this ordinance should be liable to such punishment as shall be considered fitting by the government. Article 4, the territory assigned to Said Mohammed and his followers is that of the Nogal and the Horde comprised within the limits of the Italian sphere of interest. But in view of the special agreement between the government of Italy and England, after the dispatch of the returns of the ERCO Somali delegation sent to establish peace with the English according to Somali customs and to settle certain formalities necessary for the general tranquility, the English shall authorize Said Mohammed and his followers to enter their territories, those of the English, in the country of the Nogal to feed their cattle there according to their former custom. So this was another thing that became very controversial, and it became a source of friction because Mohammed-Abdullah Hassan, according to the agreement, the British, they had promised through the Italians that they were going to allow him to graze some of his animals on some lands. But the British, either they blocked him from doing that or they captured some of his animals. And as I say, there is a letter that he wrote and he was complaining about the capture of his animals or the animals of his followers. So this article was not really adhered to. It is an agreement that basically the British, while they say they were going to honor, they did not. It continues, but said cattle shall not be permitted to pass beyond the pasturages of the wells enumerated hereafter. They are the wells of Halin, and from this, and those of Odin, and from Odin to Tifalvle, and from Tivalvle to Damot. So these are some of the areas he was not supposed to go. In the same manner also, in the case of the Majarten, there shall be a code of peace between them and all, and Said Mohammed and all his dervishes. The question of pasturages, which is at issue between these latter and the Isa Mahmud, as also between them and Omar Mahmud, shall be settled with the approval and consent of the parties according to former custom. There are outstanding issues that were going to be resolved. The lands of Mudug and Galgayo shall continue to belong to Yusuf Ali and his sons. All questions between dervishes and their neighbors should be referred to the examination and the decision of the Italian government. In confirmation of all these above stated, and as a pledge of the contracting parties, of course, Italy, Britain, and Ethiopia, and others like the Majarten, this document has been signed in duplicate by Said Mohammed-ben-Abdullah for himself and the dervishes, his followers, and by Cavaliere Pestalozza, the authorized delegate of the Italian government at Illig, Sunday, the 28th of the month of Zelhijjah in the year 1922 of the Hegira, corresponding to the 5th March of the year 1905. I have read the above document, I have understood its entire contents, I have accepted it in all in perfect sincerity, and have signed it. In short, Cavaliera Pestalozza representative knows my state in good faith, said Mohammed-ben-Abdullah, G. Pestalozza, Illig, 5th March 1905. Now there is a note. At Berbera on the 24th March 1905, a provisional agreement was signed by the representative of the Commissioner of the Somaliland Protectorate and the representative of Said Mohammed-ben-Abdullah Mullah, declaring, amongst other things, that the agreement between Italy and the Mullah of the 5th March 1905 was in accord with the views of the British government. An exchange of notes between the British and Italian governments took place in London on the 28th March 12th April and 26th May 1905, in the course of which the British government signified their adherence to the terms of the agreement between Italy and the Mullah insofar as they were affected by it, leaving, however, certain points arising out of it for further elucidation and adjustment, and on the 19th March 1907, an agreement elucidating these points was arrived at and recorded in exchange of notes between the two governments. Now there is number 39, which is in this book. You can go check that exchange. Very long note about this treaty and the communications between the British and the Italians about their treaty, including that part where they are like, yeah, we are not going to guarantee what the Ethiopians are going to do, even though the Italians signed the treaty guaranteeing that they were representing the Ethiopians. I found that to be very, very interesting. Now, this treaty, of course, did not solve the issues that were there between Mohammed-Abdullah Hassan of the Dervishes and the British and even the Italians to some extent. Of course, the war went on. Of course, Mohammed-Abdullah Hassan did get some things, including the residence. He sort of got part of that, but it did not last long. And that's something I got from reading Douglas Jaredin's book, The Mad Mullah of Somaliland, because I don't even think he ever went to live in that residence. He did not. Because he complains about sending his own people. It's like it's a residence that was managed so that his own people can go and stay. And he complains that his people were sent there, including women, and they were being arrested and terrorized, and he did not like it. He complained. So this treaty did not solve anything really. It just was just a note, we could say, but it was there. It is mentioned a lot when the conflict is discussed. And the war, of course, went on up to 1921 when Mohammed-Abdullah Hassan escaped to some parts of Ethiopia. And then he became sick, I think, and he passed on. That's when the war ended. As I say, this is a war that has the record of being the first ever in Africa where aeroplanes were used. And actually, it's because of the aeroplanes that the British managed to bring this conflict to the end, because it had taken very long time. Now, you can get this book on Amazon. If you can check the pinned comment, check the description box if you are watching on YouTube to get the link that will take you there. And if you are watching on TikTok, check my profile bio. You'll get a link there that can take you to where you can get the book, and then you can read this treaty and others. There are like that 44 different treaties, some very important treaties actually that shaped the history of the Horn of Africa. Those are my random thoughts.